Farmers, trust is everything. At Genesis Fertilizers, we're not just proposing to build a facility, we're building a future designed for you. With real progress already underway, we're closer to providing Western Canadian farmers with a reliable, locally produced fertilizer supply. Now is the time to take control of your farm's future. Learn more at genesisfertilizers.com/credibility.
Hey, let's talk about what's going on in the world of geopolitics, the market, and then tie it all together. We're talking right now to Steve Nicholson. He is with Rabobank. Steve, how are we doing?
Good, Shaun. How are you? Good to see you again, as always, and to have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's great to have you here. Okay, so broader market complex. Lots happening. A lot of sideways trade. Does that give you confidence or concern here right now?
Well, I have to admit, sitting on the other side of the border, I would say from a trade perspective, I have some concerns. Have to be worried about where does trade go from here. And you mentioned it kind of in your introduction. It's, we could talk about the Trump tariffs. We could talk about whether it's, NAFTA or USMCA. We could talk about the geopolitical unrest. I mean, just as we talked today on the 9th of December, Syria looks like it's changed governments literally almost overnight.
Yeah.
And then you have more instability in a part of the world that's unstable already. And what does that mean for trade? What does that mean for costs? So there's so many places to go with this. And I think concern. I have to be honest about that.
Well, think about, add South Korea in there too. What's going on there?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have, France has some governmental issues.
Oh,
South
right.
Korea has some. Yeah. I mean, you have them all over the world, and you look at, and as I will quote one of our macroeconomists who said, North America is kind of the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry, and that's kind of true. Yes, we have our problems. You have your issues, but for the most part, we're economically stable.
Yeah, but there is challenges too. We've got an incoming Trump administration that's talking, you look at the cabinet, you look at some of the things that the incoming president is saying as far as tariffs, and there's a lot of concern in Mexico and in Canada. And we've already had the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, visit Mar-a-Lago. That was a couple Fridays ago. Curious, what was your impression of that visit trying to calm the tariff water a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's exactly why he did it, and I'll give him his kudos for doing that. I mean, it's kind of like walking into the lion's den a little bit there. But one thing we have to think about, when Trump was elected in 2016, we didn't know. We knew what he was, but we didn't know how he would govern and how we would operate in a government in society. And we didn't know how to deal with that, whether it's we as individual citizens or countries or leaders. Fast forward 8 years, and now we know how he operates, and we also know as much as, well, he's changed, or the assassination attempt changed him. But the reality is, we've seen that that lesson, he hasn't changed. He's still Donald Trump. That's not going to change. So he likes to have world leaders come and kiss the ring, if you want to say that. And I think to Justin Trudeau's credit, he walked in lion's den and did that. Exactly for the reason you cited, is to try to, can we calm the waters around tariffs in North America, and can we have a discussion about them rather than just slap them on and that's the end of the story. So I think there's a lot of pieces there to that. I don't know, we don't really know much else that was happened in that discussion, or what the contents of the discussion, or what the outcome will be. But we do know he was there. He had a discussion with Mr. Trump, and I think that's probably a good thing to have.
I have a hard time believing, Steve, that it's going to take just the one visit. Like, I don't know. I don't know if we actually get to the application of a 25% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S., but I think it's going to take more than just that one visit to Florida.
No, I agree. I mean, with Trump, it's an ongoing discussion, but he's also, that sort of, for him, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth or think about, but I think about what that does for him is that the fact is that Trudeau made that trip to Mar-a-Lago, as have other people. So Trudeau's not the only one, And because you've made that trip to him, you've come to his home. That makes him feel like he's got a bit of I've got one up on him because he had to come to me. I didn't go to him. And so that makes him feel like he's got an upper hand in the negotiations. And the reality is, when you look at the economic impacts of tariffs, you look at the economic impacts on citizens and prices, inflation, all that, we haven't got to the nuts and bolts yet or down the nitty gritty to see what this really means. And we also know that Trump is, on a negotiation style, tends to like to do the scorched earth thing first, see where it lands, and then negotiate from there. So this is round one of, I guess I'll use a baseball. This is inning one of a 9-inning game. So,
sure enough.
Yeah.
Curious how China is reacting to U.S. farm products right now. What we've seen through the fall is China being very aggressive on the purchase of Canadian canola prior to, with the anticipation of tariffs being put on Canadian canola, having to do with that anti-dumping investigation that they're doing. What are they doing with U.S. ag goods right now?
Same thing. I mean, we're seeing a very robust purchase plan for corn, soybeans into China, particularly soybeans. Now, soybeans are pretty cheap, and China is very price sensitive, so they will look at that. This is their possibility. I do think it's also a little bit of the Trump bump, if you have it, is that they're trying to get stuff moved before he's inaugurated January 20th, in the concern that he comes into office on January 20th, signs the executive order for tariffs, and it's a done deal. And there you're stuck with higher price. So I think there's a little bit of front loading if you have it on the trade side. And having said that, my concern and what I'm going to be watching on the backside of the inauguration is, do we see Chinese purchases pull back because Trump is in office and we did all this front loading. So I think that's one thing I'll be watching to see because by that time too we'll have a better idea from a soybean perspective, what does that Brazilian crop look like? And, will it be a big crop as advertised? Right now, that all looks true. But I do think there's some front loading here. But I agree. I think Canada's benefiting from that as well. And I think China also, and my colleague in China, I've talked quite a bit about this, is that, China is they have really built up stock. If you look at canola stocks in China, while they're not huge, they're at the largest, they're at the biggest peak they've ever been before, which I think gets you back a little bit to the anti-dumping thing. Like, well, they don't need the canola because they've already front loaded and got it. So we've got to do something here.
They're crafty that way.
Oh, and I always tell people, I said, the Chinese, love them or hate them, and I or trust them or not, they're the best traders in the world. So don't ever discount them. They're very crafty. They're very smart. Absolutely.
Steve, you look a lot at trade flows and where product is moving. I know you recently presented to the Prairie Cereal Summit in Banff, and you talked to some of the farmers there about how the importers are changing. What is that? What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I looked at I looked at corn, oilseeds, and wheat, and what's happening there. And so when you look at kind of overall and think about where the importers are changing, China's was kind of leveled off a little bit. We've had this, seems like forever, but it's probably 2 decades of this continual climb in U.S. exports, or exports in general to China of agricultural products. That's from Australia, Canada, where, the Middle East, Russia, all those sorts of things. Kind of looks like that's leveling off. So then you start to look at and think, okay, so where's the growth? Where are the new trade opportunities? And, that's always a concern when you look forward. But some things kind of emerge from that. Europe is continuing to grow their imports of agricultural goods. And you sort of scratch your head and go, well, gosh, they're one of the biggest wheat producers of the world. They're also a canola or a rapeseed producer as well, but they're importing more rapeseed or canola. And I think part of that is because of what happened in Ukraine, but it's also happening, and we've talked about this with all the climate change, environmental regulation, greenhouse gas, whatever bushel back, what you want to call that. Europe is going to have less productive capacity or production capacity. And so coupled with that, with their demand because they can't get it where they want, we see a growth there as well. The other area is, this comes back home, is Mexico. Mexico continues to be a big producer or a big importer of all things agricultural. Part of that is because of a very dramatic drought in northwest Mexico. But you see the fact is their livestock industry continues to change. They have more income there, so they're eating better as a whole. I'm not saying that's across the board across Mexico, but we see that as also a growing area, particularly for those of us in North America. We're right here. We could ship rail all the way from Canada to Mexico, and we got those direct lines now, particularly with KCS coming on board with you all, and we got that direct line into Mexico. The other area that we saw, and we can come back to North America, but the other area we saw was Vietnam. Now, Vietnam is an interesting case study because it's a bit of the gateway to Southeast Asia. And so is it a gateway or is it a gray channel if you have it for product goods into China? We know from the last experience of 1718, even though there were huge tariffs, we know that product got into China through other means. And Vietnam is likely one of those places. But when you look at Southeast Asia, Vietnam is a bit of a barometer because they've had growth there in manufacturing, they've had income growth, and so the demand for Southeast Asia continues to grow. And I think those are areas we need to think about and be watching and looking for opportunities.
Yeah. So when we do have like those gray channels or back doors or however we want to phrase those trade channels,
sure.
This is what's confusing, I think, for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people necessarily aren't aware of these things existing. Where if we do see some sort of major trade war between the U.S. and China, does it give the U.S. a little bit more confidence, knowing that at the end of the day, some of these U.S. products, like soybeans, for example, they're going to get to the market they got to get to, regardless of there's what's being talked about, and then there's what's actually happening behind the scenes.
Yeah, there is. I'm going to say some, let's say, comfortableness with that, if I can use all that together. Yeah. Because product will find its way. As I always say, grain and oilseeds are like water. They will find the crack and move through it. So that will happen. And we know that China, they have built significant stocks this time. So they're prepared for this where they weren't prepared for it in 1819. So there may be a little bit less of that. But the fact is, if Brazil is moving all of their product to China, or a fair amount of it, then that means that there's other people who aren't getting their product. And so, and keep in mind, Brazil, like the U.S. and like Canada, our domestic demand continues to grow, and so Brazil needs that for their own devices as well. So, that changes the calculus as well. And then you start to look at the other thing I looked at in that analysis is look at the exporters, and you see the exporters' share of total stocks in the world continues to decline. And if that's the case, and particularly when we look at corn and oilseeds, there's only a couple big producers in the world. And so when you think about oilseeds, think about where oilseeds are produced. They're produced here in the Western Hemisphere for the most part. And so if Canada, the United States, or Brazil has a hiccup, and we'll put Argentina there as well, then the rest of the world catches a cold and now has a place to get their oilseeds. And so, that's the other issue is you just don't have a lot of free stocks if you're an importer of oilseeds in particular. So, if we have a hiccup or you have a hiccup or Brazil has a hiccup, and even Argentina, then that means that you've got to find another place you got to find another origin for your oilseeds. So that's the other piece in there you have to think about.
Well, and if you look at global trade flows, the other part of it is North America trying to be competitive on the global.
Right. That's right. And it goes back to our domestic demand. I mean, think about the amount of canola that's going into new crushing facilities. Here in the U.S., we just got the newest soybean crushing data. For the first time ever, we crushed over 200 million bushels of soybeans in 1 month in October. I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, that's unbelievable. It tells you what's happening here is that we've got to, we need to have those need to stay home to be produced. And because of that, that keeps our prices higher, which doesn't make them competitive on the global market. But at the same time, we have logistical systems in North America that Brazil doesn't have. And Brazil has a huge breakdown between the port and the farm where that, we complain about our rail here. I know that's a well-worn complaint across Canada, particularly the prairie provinces, and rightfully so. But we have our issues here as well with rail, so we have to deal with that as well. But our systems are much better suited to disruptions because we could take it down the river, we could take it by rail to the west, we could take it by rail to the east, and we have alternatives where Brazil kind of has they can go north or they can go south, and that's really it.
Yeah, but again, it's important that we continue to improve on some of that transport infrastructure so that as Brazil attempts to catch up, we don't lose this is one of our key advantages.
Absolutely. We have to continue to make the investment in that infrastructure, and that's, because if you don't, it's going to rust out or go away, and then it's going to take even more to do it. And that is a discussion we have in U.S. agriculture all the time. And as you know, in Canada with those rail systems, there's a lot of frustration there. The government's certainly been much more activist with moving rail in Canada than they have been here in the States. And I think that needs to continue to make sure that agricultural products can move.
Okay, to wrap up here, Steve, what's more likely to happen at the end of 2024 here as we head into 25? Market going down or up?
Well, I'm going to be the optimist here to leave on an optimistic note. I think that markets I think they have found a bottom. Let's put it that way. I think we're sort of in this pattern of we'll trade this range. Now, we have a lot of volatility within that range. It seems like we can't even find the middle of that range. We have to be at the top of the range or the bottom of the range. So, for producers, that's a good news. Where the top end of the range, use that to your advantage. Buyers on the like way. You get to the bottom of that range, and there's your opportunity to take care of it. Now, the thing to be watching, of course, as we cross into the new year is, of course, the South American crop. How is it going? How big does it get? It will it's going to impact oilseeds the most. So that would be something to watch for canola and soybean producers. I do think on the grain side, whether it's corn, I think when I look at the complex and think about where is the friendly part, I'm more friendly corn because you're likely not to have as good a safrinha corn crop in Brazil this year because of how the delays happened around soybeans, and that crop won't be planted in the ideal window. And so that, if you look at corn has a little bit of upside, then that also means that wheat has a little upside as well, because wheat will follow corn up and down because of the feed substitution. So I think that those are where I'm thinking about, and what I'd be watching as we go into 25.
Steve, really appreciate you joining us here today on Real Ag Radio. Thanks so much, bud.
Thanks, Shaun. It's good to see you. Thank you so much.